Welcome to another episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! Player Ranks. In this series, we rank various Yu-Gi-Oh! Themes based on your comments and suggestions. Come back every tier list Tuesday to see an all-new installment of this series. Alright guys, welcome back to another episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! Player Ranks. This is the largest series that we've had on the channel, and it's finally back. I finally have some time to actually sit down and make some of these videos. If you have any recommendations for future videos, any future tier lists that you want to see, definitely let me know in the comment section down below. And today we have a banger. We have a huge tier list. It's actually the Legendary Ocean / Kairu Shin deck / Umi deck, Legendary Fisherman, Phantasm Spiral, all of this blended into one. There's so many different ways to play all of these different decks. Definitely an awesome tier list. But let's not waste any time. Let's get started. This deck is super cool. I've been playing this deck for legitimately over 20 years now, because ever since the structure deck came out back in, I want to say 2004, 2005. I don't remember the exact timeline. But ever since that Fury of the Deep structure deck came out, this deck has just been so awesome. Obviously, it got cold for a couple years there. It kind of started to it started to suck a little bit, but they've definitely given it some really cool new support, and we're going to review all of the support. I've tried to put it in order of release to talk about it here, but let's not waste too much time. First up, we've got Legendary Fisherman. This guy's a little bit iffy, so if you're going to play him, you have to build the entire deck around him. And the huge payoff with playing him is that you get access to Legendary Fisherman number 3. And Legendary Fisherman number 3 is actually good because he's unaffected by spells and traps, and yeah, he's just really good. He banishes everything when he banishes your opponent's monsters when he hits the field. Like, he's actually a really cool payoff. The only issue with him is that he isn't actually searchable. He's like quasi-searchable, because like one of your other monsters, like Legendary Fisherman number 2, has to get destroyed, or one of your other monsters has to get destroyed. So we'll talk about him more when he gets there. So I would say playing him is it's iffy. It's like C tier. His effects on his own are really not good, and it's kind of similar to a lot of other effects that they had at the time, which is he's unaffected by spell cards. In addition to being unaffected by spell cards, he also cannot be selected as an attack target, but your opponent can just attack directly. So he's kind of just there on the field, and he can't be attacked. Now, this is very similar to a lot of cards during this time that were like Umi cards. They were just unaffected by spells, and this is actually like really dumb, because on one hand it's cool because they can't like get Raigeki'd or Darkhold or Widow Anchored or anything like that. Like, that part is cool. But the part that's not cool is it's unaffected by the Umi itself, so it doesn't get the attack boost, which isn't a lot, but I mean, it's still like it's a little bit weird of a design to be unaffected by spells if Umi's on the field, but Umi itself is a spell. It's a weird thing. I'd say C tier is probably fair. This is in every way just a worse version of the Legendary Fisherman. Deep Sea Warrior. This card basically is just as long as Umi's on the field, it's unaffected by spells. Again, same issue as the Legendary Fisherman. Almost the exact same stats. Less attack, more defense. Also 5 stars. Like, almost in every single way, just a step down from Legendary Fisherman. At least Legendary Fisherman, you get to play all of the Legendary Fisherman support. You get to search him within the archetype with, for example, the Fortress Whale and the Legendary Fisherman number 2. So there's some support built around them, but there's absolutely no reason to even play the Deep Sea Warrior. It's just in every way a worse version of the Legendary Fisherman. I'm going to put it in F tier because there's literally no point to play it. Maiden of the Aqua is, I want to say it's like a B tier card. It's not that it's like a bad card. It can be a brick sometimes. So this card typically, what it basically does is when it's on the field and there isn't a field spell on the field, that includes, by the way, your opponent's field spell, and we'll get back to that. But if there's no field spell on the field, this card counts as Umi. Now, that might not seem like, that great, but the thing is about this card is there's a lot of effects in the Umi deck that force you to get rid of your Umi in order to do stuff, which is, again, a little bit weird. That's another kind of like design flaw of the deck. But the main one, the newest one, is the Kairu Shin's Dark Reef. It gets rid of your it gets rid of your Umi, but then you can special summon 2 monsters that include Umi and text from your deck, which is actually pretty good because you can special summon Maiden of the Aqua plus Kairyu-Shin, and then you lock out your opponent on your opponent's turn, and that's like a cool small combo that you can do. The problem with this deck, with this card, is it's a little bit bricky. You never ever want to draw Maiden of the Aqua. The other issue with this card is that it's a little bit what's the thing? It's a little bit of an issue that if your opponent simply activates a field spell, it turns off this card's effect to beat Umi, and therefore it turns off the Kairyu-Shin, and that part is really annoying, because if your opponent is just playing a deck that just naturally plays a field spell, they activate that, and it's almost like they get out of your entire Kairyu-Shin lock. Yeah, that part just kind of sucks about this card. Again, a little bit bricky, and it's kind of like a card you really don't want to play, but you kind of have to play in order to make sure that you can always put Umi on the field, but at the same time your opponent can just kind of out it just by having any field spell in the game and activating it. So that's kind of the drawback. Otherwise it would be higher. Mermaid Knight is a weird one. I'd probably say it's D tier. Now this card is one that in GOAT format I remember I used to play in the Umi deck, because this card basically when Umi's on the field it can attack twice. It has 1500 attack. There's no restriction on the attacking twice, so it's not like attack twice on monsters. No. This is a classic, like early Yu-Gi-Oh! Attack twice. So it used to be able to attack over 2 goats. It was like a pretty cool card back then, but the problem with this card is it's just too weak for what it does. It's only 1500 attack, so attacking twice doesn't mean anything. It's like a Lackluster Soldier attacking twice, right? That's 3000 attack. It means something. Attacking twice with a monster that's 1500 is it's almost meaningless, but it's still better than Deep Sea Warrior. Next is the amphibious little plane. I forget what the name is. This one again is kind of like, I probably say, as always, right? S tier is something you always play. A tier is something you should play. B tier is good but optional. C is kind of depends on your deck building, and then D is you probably shouldn't play, and F you should never play. So I'd probably say you probably shouldn't play this. It's between C and D tier. Basically, this lets your monster, basically if Umi's on the field, this monster can attack directly. That's not terrible for like time, because, you know, if life points are getting low, it's nice to sometimes just be able to attack directly. The problem is this card's been totally power crept with the new Mega Fortress Whale, because the Mega Fortress Whale basically makes it so all of your water monsters can attack directly if you have Umi on the field. So you don't just attack with one water monster, so you literally attack with all of them, which often can be 8000 and can be game. So there's almost no reason to play this other than you can sometimes cheese out a quick win or some extra damage. So it's just been power crept. That's why it is where it is. Next is the Orca Fortress Whale. I believe this is what it's called, the Orca. This card, artwork wise, I'd put it in S tier. I love this card. It looks so cool. It's like an orca with a bunch of missiles on top. I remember I pulled the super rare back in Invasion of Chaos years and years ago. The colors are great. I think this is a beautiful card. I gotta buy a PSA 10 one day. But here's the problem with this card. It sucks. I almost want, it's between D and F tier, probably low D, maybe F. This card just basically, it doesn't actually do anything. It's level 5 and you can like normal summon and stuff. But basically it works with these 2 cards, which is Torpedo Fish and the Cannonball Shellfish. Basically, if you have Torpedo Fish on the field, you contribute it to destroy a monster. If you have the Cannonball Shellfish, you contribute that to destroy a spell and trap card. It takes way too much setup to even do any of this. They also have other effects where these 2 morons over here are basically unaffected by spell cards, so they have the same situation as Legendary Fisherman and Deep Sea Warrior, where they're unaffected by spells in a deck that is built around a field spell, so they don't even get the 200 point boost, and they really need it because they're only 1000 attack. So these two pipsqueaks unfortunately kind of suck. They suck. They are in every single way worse than Deep Sea Warrior. Their only like good thing about them is that they work with the Orca, but like how much setup does this involve, right? You got to have the Orca on the field plus this idiot in order to pop 1 spell, 1 trap card, and you have to tribute them 4 cost in order to do all of this. I mean, it's honestly F tier 2. It's too much. It really is too much. Not even when the deck like first released did you play any of this stuff, because it's just too bricky and stupid. You're better off just playing Terra King Salmon, which is a normal monster. That's a level 5 that you could just normal summon, and you just drop Terra King Salmon onto the field. Again, 2400 attack with the boost, 2600 normal summon. But it used to be able to beat over every single Monarch in the game, Jinzo, all of that stuff. That was much better than playing the Three Stooges over here. Next is Leviathan, Levia Dragon Daedalus. This is like the definition of a C tier card. I always think about like including this in a modern Umi deck, because this effect it's a serious effect. It's a really good effect. Basically what it does is you can send in Umi on your side of the field to the graveyard in order to destroy all other cards on the field. Now that effect isn't actually like that bad, right? You bomb the entire field, your opponent's field, every single card, spell, trap, monster, everything, and then you're stuck with this guy on your side of the board. 2600 attack. It's not bad, and he's a level 7, so you can summon him 1 tribute. That was always pretty cool. This was like the boss monster of the deck back in the day. Really cool card design. The problem is it's just counterproductive to the modern version of the deck, and that is kind of the issue with this card. Because again, you're destroying everything on your side and your opponent's side of the field, which includes, you know, your spawn trap cards, their spawn trap cards. You don't want to destroy your own spawn trap cards. Now, there is a point in the game where this doesn't really matter, because if you set up Sea Stealth, for example, and then you set up Sea Stealth 2 and Umi, and you send an Umi to the graveyard, and you've already activated the effect of Sea Stealth to protect your back row, you can protect against that destruction effect, which is fine, right? You can protect against that destruction effect, but usually by the time you have Sea Stealth and Sea Stealth 2 and Umi on the field, and most likely a Kairyu-Shin, you probably have already won the game, so you don't even need this effect. So the problem is, in the modern version of the deck, this effect is just not very needed. The deck is more of a control deck now. There's just, again, just blowing up your board, your opponent's board just doesn't really come up that much. You'd rather use your special summons on another monster, or your normal summon on another monster than this monster, unfortunately. But I do think it looks cool, and I think it's awesome. And again, if I was grading it based on like how the deck used to play, it would probably be S tier, right? If we're talking GOAT format, this card's the best card in the entire archetype, but in the modern deck, it's just not very good. Next is the Daedalus, but this is like the 2-headed Daedalus. I'm going to put this right behind the regular Daedalus. It's a card that is cool also. This one can be special summoned, so you can summon it off of things like Reasoning. You can summon off the Jellyfish, which is the original Daedalus. Daedalus, the 2-headed one. Unfortunately, this cannot be special summoned except by tributing the old Daedalus. So this is the only way to summon it. So you already have to summon this, then you tribute this for this. Now, what is the advantage? It basically has an effect where you get to send your own Umi to the graveyard, and then you get to send all other cards on the field and in both players' hands to the graveyard. Now that effect is like a really cool payoff, but the problem is now you're playing an additional brick on top of a brick, which again, this is a control deck. You can't really afford bricks. You need to put traps, traps, floodgates, whatever you have to do in this deck. This deck already sometimes loses to 1 Ash Blossom. You can't afford to be playing 3-4 bricks on top of the bricks that you're already playing. It'd be a cool card to pull off, definitely. This is like the water version of Chaos Emperor Dragon. This guy's an OG. I love him, but the problem is he just doesn't... he's a little bit too bricky. Again, you have to play too much. Like, it's not even that it's unsearchable. Like, both of these say Umi in the name, so they are searchable. You can summon the Daedalus off of Kairyu-Shin's Dark Reef. You can search this with Fish Sonar. Like, it's searchable and stuff. But again, this is just worse than just simply playing Kairyu-Shin, locking your opponent out of summoning non-water monsters. It's the reality. It's just not as good of a strategy as other strategies in the deck. Next is Warrior of Atlantis. This guy is A tier, and he's the only reason he's not S tier, and I'll tell you in a second. He's A tier. So what this guy does is you send him to the grave, from your hand to the graveyard, and then you can search the Legendary Ocean. Specifically, the Legendary Ocean. Not Umi, the Legendary Ocean. Now, from a design standpoint, I love these cards. I love monsters that discard themselves to retrieve a field spell. I love this design because it gets around the fact that Konami hit terraforming and hit metaverse. It gets around that totally. I love that, and if your deck has one of these monsters, it's built in, it's great. That's the major positive of this card. Also, it not only is it kind of, it's also a monster. On top of being a Field Spell Searcher, essentially another copy of the Field Spell, it's also a monster. So if you have 2 copies, instead of having 2 copies, like a Terraforming and an Umi, you have this guy and an Umi, and you can actually normal summon this guy and do something with him, because, you know, he has 1800 attack, he gets buffed, like, he's actually, you know, a decent card, so it's pretty, I'm sure, actually, he might have 1900, I don't remember exactly, 18 or 1900 attack, he gets buffed, like, he's a decent card. He's a body if you already have Umi in play. Now, the negatives of this card is, this card actually legitimately is a card that's needed in errata for almost 15 years. This card specifically searches the Legendary Ocean. But here's the problem. The Legendary Ocean doesn't exist. Now you're probably saying, what are you talking about? Legendary Ocean does exist. No, it does exist. It's right here. The problem is the Legendary Ocean always counts as Umi. And the issue with that is, since it always counts as Umi, since Legendary Ocean always counts as Umi, it doesn't actually exist. There isn't a card in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh called the Legendary Ocean. So technically this shouldn't be able to search anything, because in your deck this is Umi, in your hand this is Umi, in your Banish Zone this is Umi, this is always Umi. Like, you can't even play Legendary Ocean, Umi, Pacifist, and Lumeria, and this card right here, the Magical City, the Deep Sea Diva City. You can't play all of these cards because they always count as Umi. Therefore, you can only play 3 total of any of these cards. So the issue with this card is that because of it says the Legendary Ocean, it actually can't search all of these other Umi strategies, which is kind of frustrating because it specifically only searches this one card. Also, the other synergy that it loses is that since it says searches the Legendary Ocean, it itself can't be searched by the cards that say that by the cards that search Legendary Ocean cards. So for example, like Fish Sonar cannot search Warrior of Atlantis, for example, which actually is kind of frustrating because it would be basically another copy of the Field Spell, and you can actually probably lower the amount of Warrior of Atlantis that you play, and you can make the deck significantly less bricky, which would be really cool because it doesn't technically say Umi in its text. It says the Legendary Ocean. You also can't summon it off of Sea Stealth attack because, again, it doesn't say Umi in the text. Again, it says Legendary Ocean, which is really frustrating, and it's one of the real flaws of this card. It really needs an errata because from an absolute ruling standpoint, this card shouldn't be able to search anything. Because technically it searches a card that isn't even in the game. Definitely needs a change, but other than that, like, it's a pretty good card. Other than my little rant there. Next is Kotoris. This guy is another one of these weird, he's like the little brother of Daedalus. He's another one of these weird cards where you have to give up Umi in order to do something, which I haven't spoken about this, but that's actually kind of dumb. That's one of the big, like, conflicting points of this deck. Like, you blow up your own Field Spell, the heart and soul of your deck, in order to do something. It's the same as like the monsters being unaffected by spells, which is the deck. Like, the whole point of the deck is the Field Spell is the main point of the deck, and then your monsters are unaffected by spells, which includes your own Field Spell. Kotoris is the same way. It's kind of another counterproductive facet of the deck where you send your own Field Spell to the graveyard, Umi, to the graveyard in order to pop 2 cards. Now, that's not a bad effect, right? Send a Field Spell to the graveyard, pop 2 cards, especially if you have an extra copy of the Field Spell, especially if you have, like, what's it called? If you have, like, one of the cards that count as the Field Spell, like this right here, or Sea Stealth 2, or you have an extra copy of maybe you have Sea Stealth 1, you have Sea Stealth face down, Sea Stealth attack face down, so you activate Kotoris, get rid of your Field Spell, you get rid of your Umi, and then just activate Sea Stealth and get it back. Like, in those cases, it's actually quite fine. But the problem is, at the early stages of the game where you may only have one Field Spell in play, this can be a really disastrous play sometimes. You get rid of your Field Spell, and then you turn off your own Kairu Shinlock, and then all of a sudden your opponent's, like, able to play, and it's a weird situation. Next is Legendary Ocean 3. I'd say he's probably, like, somewhere in C tier. Again, he's very optional. You have to build the entire deck around him. One issue with him is, again, he is not really searchable. Like, he's technically searchable, but he's not, like, really searchable. He doesn't say Umi in his text, so you can't search him with Fish Sonar, which is a little bit of a problem. On top of not being able to search him with Fish Sonar, the only other way to search him is that you can, when Mega Fortress Whale leaves the field, you can search him, and when Legendary Fisherman number 2 leaves the field, you can search him, which are both decent ways to search him. But again, it has to be like destroyed by your opponent's battle or card effect, which relies on your opponent to do something for you to get something, which is not the best way of searching. Now, the good thing about Legendary Fisherman number 3 is he does have a pretty good payoff. So what does he do exactly? Basically, all you have to do to summon him is tribute a Legendary Fisherman. So this is regular Legendary Fisherman you can do. You can use this girl right here because she copies a level and a name in the graveyard. So you can use her in order to special summon the Legendary Fisherman number 3. And you can also use Legendary Fisherman number 2. So you can use any one of those cards to summon Legendary Fisherman number 3. All you have to do is just tribute one of them, and then you can summon this thing, which is pretty cool. Easy to summon. The problem is easy to summon, hard to search. Here's the positive part about it, right? He's easy to summon. One of his effects, when he's summoned, you can banish all monsters your opponent controls. That is non-targeting, non-destruction removal that banishes. That is really, really, really good. It's like a Raigeki with banishing. It's such great removal. So that's effect number 1. Effect number 2 is that this card can't be destroyed by battle or your opponent's card effect, either one, and it's unaffected, completely unaffected by spells and traps. So your opponent basically has to remove it in any other way that does not involve destruction or battle, and then it can't be spells or traps. So they basically have to use a monster effect that spins or banishes or something like that in order to get rid of this card, which that is actually really, really strong. Like, that is a great effect. Yeah, they have to use like a Nightmare Unicorn or something like that to get rid of this card, because otherwise they really can't. Like, it's actually a really cool effect. On top of that, you can return all cards that are banished back to the graveyard. So this is another kind of like weird effect, but the battle damage that your opponent would take, the first battle damage that they would take, is doubled. That again is like a pretty cool effect, because this guy's 2,500. You double the damage. That's 5,000. That's like only 3,000 more and you win the game. It's kind of crazy. And on top of that, if you summon the Mega Fortress Whale and make that a direct attack, that's pretty good. Now, the one drawback is this card, that banishing effect, when it's summoned to the field and it banishes all your opponent's monsters, that effect, if you use it, this card can't attack. Now, it's not a huge drawback, because you can summon other stuff, and if you're banishing your opponent's all their monsters, that's like whatever, but still very good. Now, the problem is, again, this card's just not really searchable. It's searchable through means that are kind of iffy, and that's kind of why I put it in C tier. It's the big payoff to playing the Legendary Fisherman package, but the package in itself is very much bricky and not as good as the Kairyu-Shin stuff. Next is Phantasm Spiral Dragon. I'd say this is probably somewhere in C tier. If you're playing Phantasm Spirals, I really don't recommend that you play the Phantasm Spiral Dragon, but if you do play it, I'm not going to like knock it. I get why you would play it, right? But I just, generally speaking, playing Phantasm Spiral Dragon means you're playing the equips, and you probably shouldn't be playing the equips. Next is Legendary Fisherman number 2. This guy basically always counts as he's like a better version of Legendary Fisherman number 1. He's unaffected by monster effects. He always counts as Legendary Fisherman, I think, in the graveyard and on the field. So it doesn't always count as Legendary Fisherman good, because then you would only be able to play 3 total. But yeah, basically in the graveyard and on the field, it counts as Legendary Fisherman. So basically, you can tribute it to summon Legendary Fisher number 3. The weird thing about this card is it actually came out after Legendary Fisherman number 3. This was always odd to me. They came out Legendary Fisherman, then they came out Legendary Fisherman 3, then number 2, which is super odd. But regardless, he's unaffected by monster effects, which is very useful. It's much more useful than being unaffected by your own field spell. And then he has an effect where if he's destroyed by battle or your opponent's card effect, you can search I believe it's a water warrior monster. So basically Legendary Fisherman number 3. This is your way of searching it. Unfortunately, it's a little bit slow, but it's better than nothing, right? Next is Citadel Whale. This guy is like the definition of C tier. He's another one that's like super weird. He used to be somewhat playable, but he's kind of like iffy. Basically, he has 3 effects that are all like 4 out of 10 effects, but they're all 4 out of 10 effects on one card. And he's a little bit of a brick himself because he's level 7. And if you don't have Jellyfish, you cannot even put him out onto the field. Basically what he does is, well, Jellyfish and Dark Reef. Basically what he does is when he is special summoned, you can set Sea Stealth directly to your field. So we're talking about Sea Stealth 1, the trap card, Sea Stealth attack. That effect, pretty good. Like a pretty solid effect. Again, he's kind of a big monster. He's level 7. So sometimes you will one tribute summon him. So you won't be able to get that because it's not a special summon. He has another effect where if you have 2 water monsters and you have him in your hand or in the graveyard, you can tribute those 2 water monsters and special summon him. Again, it's not a bad effect. It's a cool recursion effect. But let's be honest with ourselves. Most of the time, we're not trying to give up 2 water monsters in order to summon this guy from the graveyard. He's just not that good. And usually if you have like a Kairyu-Shin and a Jellyfish, you're not trying to give those 2 up for this guy because one's a Floodgate, the other one's a Negate, and all this guy gets you is 1 copy of Sea Stealth. Like, it's not a great trade. And then it has another effect where it basically has targeting protection. So if your card is targeted and you have Umi on the field, you can negate it. Again, targeting protection is not that bad, but it's not like a negate every single turn, right? That's the issue with it. It's not like a continuous negate that you can use. That would be really cool, right? If this could negate a monster spell or trap just once per turn, great. No doubt in my mind, I would use this card. The problem is it just gives you targeting protection, which comes up sometimes, right? If your opponent tries to target like a Kairyu-Shin with an impermanence or something, okay, fine, right? It can come in handy. But the problem is, again, with this card, it's like 3 effects that are kind of situational, and they're like 4 out of 10 effects, and they're just not good enough to put the card over the hump. It's kind of like a C tier card. You can maybe include it in some like fringe builds, but for the most part, I'd say you're not playing this card. Next is Kairyu-Shin. This is the heart and soul of the deck. This is one of the best cards in the archetype. I'm still a little iffy. So it's actually very good. So basically what this card does, it's a level 5. This is close to the original Kairyu-Shin monster that came out years and years and years. Well, it didn't come out years and years ago, but basically it's the one from the anime that I believe killed Mako Tsunami's dad. Basically what this card does is it locks your opponent into having 1 non-water monster, and that's all they can summon. So for example, if your opponent has 1 dark monster on the field, they can only control that 1 dark monster. Any additional monsters that they would try to summon have to be water monsters. So it basically locks your opponent into 1 non-water monster. It's like a Gozen match basically for everything but waters, which is great because waters are one of the least represented types in the entire game. There's almost never a water deck in the meta, which sucks. Unless you're playing this deck, it's great. That's one of the best parts of the card. The other part of the card is also really good, which is that this card basically, once per turn, you can search a spawn trap card that says, I believe, a Kairyu-Shin spawn trap card, a Umi spawn trap card, or a Sea Stealth spawn trap card. You can search any one of those 3 trap cards, spawn or trap cards to your hand, which is almost the entire lineup of spawn trap cards that are relevant, right? You can search Pacifist, you can search Legendary Ocean, you can search, what are we looking at here? You can search the, what is this, Rage of Kairyu-Shin, Sea Stealth 2, Sea Stealth 1, you can search any, Kairyu-Shin's Dark Reef, you can search all of the new good spawn trap cards, including some of the old, not as good spawn trap cards, but the best card in almost, I would say definitely the best monster in the entire archetype. It's almost undisputable. It's just that good. Yeah, very, very, very strong card. Very hard to out. It gives the deck a win condition. It gives the deck grind game. It gives the deck basically everything. Without this card, this deck is borderline just unplayable, if we're being honest. Next is Doom Kraken. Doom Kraken is either B or A tier. I'd say it's somewhere. I'd say if you're playing this deck, you're probably playing Doom Kraken. So yeah, Doom Kraken is a good card. It's definitely always a one-of that you play. Basically what it does is it has a quick effect where if Umi's on the field, you can return one of your water monsters to your hand and destroy a monster your opponent controls, which again is pretty cool because it can help you dodge imperm and stuff like that. So if like your opponent, if you activate Jellyfish, for example, to negate your opponent's monster, effect, and then your opponent tries to imperm, you can activate Doomkraken, return the jellyfish, summon Doomkraken, pop a monster, and then you could dodge the imperm. So it could do like cool things where you can dodge effects, you can pop your opponent's cards. It's a quick effect, it activates in hand, so it's a little hard for your opponent to interact with that. Additionally, it has another effect where if your opponent declares an attack, you can return this card to the hand and negate that attack. That again also comes in handy, because if you have like a Kairyu-Shin in defense mode and your opponent like normal summons a big monster and they attempt to attack it, you can Doomkraken, stop the attack, and then they're still locked into their non-water monster, their one non-water monster. So pretty cool overall. Like, it's a good card. I'd say it's almost, generally speaking, a good one of. Next is Jellyfish. Jellyfish is A or S tier. I'd say it's probably S tier. It's another card. It's like one of the best cards in the archetype. Basically what it does is you can send an Umi to the graveyard, and then you can special summon any water monster from your hand, like any. There's no level restriction. I love that about this card. Obviously, it's not summoning like Legendary Fisherman 3 or Neo Daedalus. Like, it's not summoning those two because they can't be special summoned. But it can summon Citadel Whale, Levia Dragon, like all of these like big level 7s, level 8s. Like, it can summon all of those, which is really cool. Yeah, it can do that. And then on top of that, having that effect, which is already a really good effect, plus it puts Umi in the graveyard, which you might seem like, why would you want to put your Umi in the graveyard? It sends for cost the Umi to the graveyard from your deck, which is really good, because sending for cost for an activation is amazing. It's like a Foolish Burial effect built into a special summoning effect. That's important because if you put like if you put like Legendary Ocean or Pacifist in the graveyard, you can just get it back with Sea Stealth attack the following turn. So it's almost a way to unbrick your hand in a variety of ways, actually, because it can unbrick your hand by summoning Kairyu-Shin and then searching for your field spell, or it can unbrick your hand by sending that the Umi to the graveyard and then activating Sea Stealth the next turn. So it's like a really great way to unbrick your hand. So even if you don't have Legendary Ocean in your opening hand, or Umi, or access to Umi, this card can give you access to Umi, which is really cool. It has another effect which is also really good, which is if your opponent activates a monster or spell effect, you can negate that effect and then gain 600 attack optionally. Both of those effects are just really good. You almost never don't want to gain the 600 attack, but it's still nice. The only time, yeah, you almost never want to not gain the 600 attack. You might as well just gain it automatically. But yeah, this card is just really, really good. The only drawback is that it doesn't negate traps, and the biggest, like, normally it wouldn't even matter because traps are almost irrelevant in Yu-Gi-Oh! For being honest. Like, the only traps that see any use are like Imperm and Evenly Matched, and it just so happens that Imperm and Evenly Matched are the Achilles heel to this deck. Literally, those are the cards that beat this deck. It's Imperm and Evenly Matched. So Imperm, they use Imperm on the Kairyu-Shin. Obviously, yes, you can play around it. I know you can use Kairyu-Shin, stuff like that. Like, you can Kairyu-Shin's Dark Reef, you can play around it, but it does stop Kairyu-Shin's Floodgate effect. And then Achilles heel number 2 is the Evenly Matched, which Evenly Matched, this deck doesn't have an answer to Evenly Matched. And Evenly Matched is basically, it ends the game, because if they can resolve an Evenly Matched, and no matter what combination of things you negate, it's not going to end well for you, because in order for most of these effects to be in play, you have to have Umi on the field. If Umi's not in the field, these basically become a bunch of normal monsters that don't do anything except for Phantom Spiral Dragon. It's already a normal monster, but like everybody else basically becomes a normal monster if Umi's not on the field. So it's basically Evenly Matched is literally the one card that absolutely demolishes this deck, and you have no way to negate it. That kind of sucks, but still, Jellyfish is a really good card. Next is Mega Fortress Whale. I'd say Mega Fortress Whale like high B tier. Mega Fortress Whale is like a cool card, but he's kind of like in that department where he's kind of bricky. You can't really like normal summon him unless you tribute something. Now the problem with him is he has great effects. Again, he's just a little bit bricky. So basically what he does is he has an effect where, number one, he has an effect where if this card if Umi's on the field, you can make all water monsters you control able to attack directly. That is amazing because if you go first, you summon, you set up the Jellyfish, Kairyu-Shin, lock your opponent out of playing for a turn. Then you activate Dark Reef, special summon him and any other water monster. Following turn, you make them all attack directly, and you basically win. Your opponent's locked into that one non-water monster. You never ever destroy it. They're still locked into it, and you basically just attack directly. That effect is amazing. It makes all of your monsters attack directly, which it makes 8,000 damage so easy. On top of it, everything's getting buffed by 200 from Legendary Ocean. Like that entire like breakdown is really, really good. So that is obviously very, very good. Secondly, it has an effect where during the battle phase, it has a quick effect where you can just destroy a monster on the field. Destroy your opponent's monster. Again, really good effect. It's just a lot of people don't see it coming because you can summon this card from your graveyard. For card effect, it floats into a water warrior monster. You can search the Legendary Fisherman, Fisherman 2, or Legendary Fisherman. You can search any one of these, or you can search, there's a normal water monster that you can search that is also a normal warrior. Yeah, you can search that thing also. Basically, it floats, but the decks that I play don't even play anything that this thing can even float into, so that effect is irrelevant. But again, I don't like the fact that the only way to search the Legendary Fisherman number 3 is like something has to be going wrong for you to finally be able to get this card. Unfortunately, I wish it was more searchable because it's actually a really, really good card. But yeah, overall, I'd say it's a B tier. It's a really good card, but it can be a little bit bricky. All right, next is Yorishi of the Aqua. I'd say this is probably a B tier. This is like a, what are they called? Like a reskin. I forget what the exact like name for it would be, but it's kind of like a remake of the Maiden of the Aqua. And it's honestly not even better than Maiden of the Aqua. And like, obviously, this is the exact same card. It's almost the exact same art, except for this is like zoomed out a little bit. I mean, it's literally the exact same girl. It's the same chick on the thing. It's the same girl, but it's a little bit zoomed out so you can see everything. You can see her fully. But basically, this has a multitude of different effects. It has all graveyard, kind of like, it has to do with your graveyard effects. So basically, effect number 1, this is its on-field effect. If you have this monster on the field, you can target a water monster. You can either copy the monster's name and the monster's level. So the only use that I've ever come up with this is you can use it with the Legendary Fisherman. You can copy its name, and then you contribute this card for Legendary Fisherman number 3. The other thing is you can copy like Kid Kalos, for example, in tier limits, because this is technically an Aqua monster. You could copy Kid Kalos's graveyard name, and then you basically, this monster becomes Kid Kalos, which again, it's very niche. You wouldn't usually do it, but I'm just giving you some rough ideas. Other than that, I haven't really found a use as of yet for this card. The other effect is you can just special summon the monster that you targeted in defense mode. So it summons any water monster with a level. So essentially, like any monster here, even synchros, it can summon stuff like that. It just can't summon a link monster because it summons obviously in defense mode. So it basically can summon almost any monster in the game that's water from the graveyard unless it's a link monster. So those are its like on-field effects. Again, not like terrible effects, but again, a little bit more of like, it doesn't really interrupt your opponent from playing. And this deck really is this is what you need to summon onto the board turn 1, is stuff that can interrupt your opponent. And then its second effect, which is also its third effect, I should say, is really good, which is basically that if this card's in the graveyard, you can banish it, and then you can target an Umi in your graveyard and then add it back to hand. That effect is really, really good. And I wish there was better ways to put this into the graveyard, more reasonable ways to put this in the graveyard, because it's one of the only recursions that this deck even has. There's not a lot of ways to get Umi back to your hand, like almost at all, other than Sea Stealth Attack. There's nothing here that gets Umi back from the graveyard. So sometimes like you'll mill too many and it'll be a tough situation for you, but it's cool that you can add Pacifist or you can add Sea Stealth back. It's cool to have a card like that available to you, so it's actually pretty good, especially in like tier limit format where your opponent's like milling your deck for you. So definitely I'd say it's probably somewhere in B tier. Cool card, but can be a little bit iffy sometimes. All right, next up is Amphibious Bugroth M11, and this card is weird. I'd say it's probably in D tier. Here's the strangest part. This is actually the newest card out of all of the cards that I'm going to be talking about. This is its effect. So if Umi's not on the field, it can't attack directly. But if Umi's not on the field, it gains 700 attack. This is a monster. It's 1850 attack, level 5. So its stats are already bad. But it gains attack if Umi's not on the field. The entire point of the deck is to have Umi on the field. Why does it gain attack with Umi's not on the field? It doesn't even make sense. And then secondly, it has an effect where you can target a non-water monster and destroy it, which typically is going to be your opponent's monster. But that effect's not a quick effect. It's just a normal old target destroy effect. Like this card, and it's a hard once per turn too. A lot of these effects, especially in some of these older cards, aren't hard once per turn. They're not once per turn at all, let alone hard once per turn. This is a hard once per turn. So this card is just like, why would you use this? Like, it's so not as good as some of the other cards. It's not as good as all of these cards that I read up here. Like, where's the payoff to this card? It's just, I just don't see myself playing it. It pops your opponent's, it pops a non-water monster, but it's not a quick effect. Like, it's not an interruption. It just simply pops one monster during your turn only, and then it loses attack when you have your own field spell on the field, which you work so hard to keep on the field. Like, it doesn't make sense. This card, it's shocking that this card got released, like a 2007 Umi card. Like, there's no way that this card, maybe this was stuck in like customs or something, because it doesn't even make sense. I don't know how this card was released this recently, because it sucks so much. And it's kind of like a re-wave of this card, which is maybe even honestly probably better than this card. Weird. Fortress Rail is F tier. This card is another one that's kind of been reskinned, re-waved, so it's been remade twice into Citadel Whale and Mega Fortress Whale, so there's almost no reason to play the original. Plus it's a ritual, so rituals suck, and it's a non-effect rituals. Non-effect rituals suck even more than regular rituals unless it's Hungry Burger. Alright, so now we're off to the Umi, or the spells. Next is Umi. I wouldn't recommend playing regular Umi. Like, there's no reason to play like regular Umi. There's absolutely no reason to play regular Umi. I'd say I'm gonna put it in D tier just because I don't want to put it in F tier, because it's not like unplayable completely, but there's no reason to actually play it because Legendary Ocean is better in every single imaginable way. This basically just buffs all. I think it's like Sea Serpent, Aqua, and one more of the water, a fish, like Sea Serpent, Aqua, Fish. Like, it buffs all of those monsters. That doesn't even include all of the other like water monsters that you have, like the water machines and the water warriors, stuff like that. It doesn't even include any of that. So it buffs all of those monsters, and that's it. It's basically just a buff. It doesn't modulate levels. It doesn't do anything else other than basically that. And for that reason, I think it's D tier. Next is, I think this is A tier. This is Legendary Ocean. It's the heart and soul of your deck. Basically what this card does is it makes all water monsters on the field and in players' hands lose 1 level, which means you can normal summon level 5 monsters, you can summon level 7 monsters with 1 tribute, and it buffs all water monsters by 200. It doesn't matter if they're sea serpents or not. None of that matters. It buffs all water monsters. Now what's cool about that is it's integral to the deck, because a lot of these monsters are level 7s, level 5s. It makes Kairyu-Shin a normal summon. It makes, again, Mega Fortress Whale a 1 tribute summon, which is really, really strong. Very, very good. Definitely probably the best field spell to play in a pure... Yeah, it's the best field spell to play if you're playing this deck kind of pure. It's by far the best. Also, as a side, it's kind of cool. This deck has a really good matchup against Sword Soul because of this field spell. Like, if you just activate the field spell and nothing else, like you just activate field spell, pass. Basically what this does against Sword Soul is when they summon Moyi, it drops the level of Moyi by 1, and it drops the token by 1. And when you do that, it forces them to have to summon a Synchro 6. They don't play Synchro 6s like at all. They play Denlong, which is Synchro 5. They don't play Synchro 6s. So now they're locked into a level which they don't even have available in their deck. They have nothing to do with it. They end up making like maybe a Tenyi. Then you can't even, I don't think you can even do anything other than Synchro Summon with that tuner. So that tuner's just kind of stuck on the board. It's actually really a funny situation for them to be in, because they don't realize it until it's already too late. I think all of the Sword Soul tokens are all water. It's also good against other water decks that do stuff like, it's very good against sharks because you lower their level and now they can't go into their rank 4s. It's very good against What are some other water decks? Yeah, Sharks. It doesn't really make a difference against Marincess, but it's a huge difference against Goatee, because, again, you lower their level, so now Synchro Summoning becomes a little bit more complicated, because every time they try to Synchro Summon, everything's dropped by 1, which is really annoying. So this can come up because it lowers your monster's levels and your opponent's, so definitely kind of weird, but does come up. Next is the Phantasm Spiral City. This card is an easy S tier. So in the Phantasm Spiral deck, which is a part of obviously this tier list, this is the heart and soul of the Phantasm Spiral deck. It is, without this card, you cannot play. It's why when Terraforming gets dropped on the ban list, it's bad for this deck. When Metaverse gets dropped on this ban list, it's bad for this deck. Like this deck needs to have access to its field spells. Basically what this card does is it always counts as Umi, just like all of the other field spells that I'm going to be talking about. And then it has an effect where if a normal monster is summoned, you can search a Phantasm Spiral Trap card. And then it has another effect where if your opponent activates any effect, monster, spell, trap, any kind of effect, you can summon a token onto your side of the field, a Phantasm Spiral token that has 2000 attack, 2000 defense. It's level 8. Stats are very important. 2000 attack, 2000 defense, huge token. This locks you into only normal monsters for the rest of that turn. Which isn't a big deal at all. It locks you into normal monsters, but that effect is really, really strong. And the stats are really important because the token is level 8, which means it works very well with Sea Stealth attack. And it basically is the heart and soul of the Phantasm Spiral deck. Without it, you literally cannot play. You get a token every single time your opponent activates something. As long as you can continue to get rid of your token, it's a very good field spell. Next is Phantasm Spiral Wave. These are the equip spells. I'm going to put all of the equip spells in C tier. They all have different effects, but they all are just not that good. I don't recommend playing the equip spells. So just as a quick speed run here, Wave, basically if your monster battles, it can't be destroyed by battle. If your monster battles, you can, at the end of the battle, you can discard a card your opponent controls, discard a card from your opponent's hand, and summon a Phantasm Spiral Dragon, which is this dude right here. The problem with that is it's at the end of the battle, so then you can't continue your onslaught. Next is the Phantasm Spiral Wave, Phantasm Spiral Grip. This card, basically what it does is when you attack your opponent's when you destroy your opponent's monster by battle, this card buffs your monster by 500. When you destroy your opponent's monster by battle, you can inflict 1000 and then summon a Phantasm Spiral Dragon and re-equip this card onto your your Phantasm Spiral Dragon. And then the last equip spell is if it gives your monster piercing, and if you do damage to your opponent, you can special summon a Phantasm Spiral Dragon from your deck and then re-equip this card onto your Phantasm Spiral Dragon. So they all re-equip to the Phantasm Spiral Dragon. It's all pretty cool. They all have different advantages and disadvantages. I'd say probably the best one is Grip because it gives you a buff and it inflicts 1000. And so they're all good for their own reason, right? Because this card's a card. This you can even attack directly and still pull it off. Like, they all have their advantages and disadvantages, but I'd say none of them are really worth playing. The best way to play Phantasm Spirals is just to control variants, so you don't have to mess with all these equip spells. Maybe play one, but then you got to play too many bricks, which is why I ultimately cut. This is the Umi before Umi. It has Umi in the name, but you can't really search it because it's technically, it says Umi, UMI, but UMI, but it's not technically Umi. But it's like the field spell used to be better than Umi a long time ago, but no longer. Next is the Lumeria. This is another Umi variant. I'd probably say it's in C tier. It's like a cool one to play. It increases the levels of the monsters on board equal to the amount of water monsters that you control, which can come. Your Kairu Shin suddenly becomes level 8, and then you can overlay 2 Kairu Shins and then do like rank 8 plays, for example. If you have synchros, you can make large synchros. Like, that can come in handy, but generally speaking, I haven't found personally a strategy where I've used this card to my advantage in an Umi deck, basically. So maybe not yet. I'd say it's probably C tier just because I haven't figured anything out, and I haven't seen anybody figure anything out with it so far. Also, it gives all water monster 200 attack. All right, next up is Magellantica. This is another one I'd say is probably in C tier. It's a cool, like, it's the Deep Sea Diva field spell, but I just haven't really found a use for it yet. in the Umi deck. Basically what this card does, has 3 effects that are, again, it's kind of like Citadel Whale. It has 3 effects that are decent but not like great. They're just kind of okay effects. So effect number 1 is you can take a water monster and place it on the top of your deck. I don't see how that's really useful in the Umi deck. There's probably a way you can use that in the Deep Sea Diva deck, but in this deck, like you could probably summon Coral Dragon and draw the card, so it can come in handy. But in this deck, I don't see how that could be very useful to you. Yes, it doesn't really work like that. Effect number 2 is that when you summon a water synchro monster, you can look into your opponent's hand and you can banish a random card. You can banish a card until the end phase. Again, not bad because you can like play around hand traps, but this deck doesn't really like synchro summon. The whole point is to end on the existing water monsters that you have. So it's really not all of that great for this particular deck. And then effect number 3 is that you can basically target a monster you control, a water monster you control, and increase its level by either 1 or 2. This again can come in handy because you can make synchro summoning easier, but there's not a lot of tuners that work with this deck. Like there are some that definitely work with this deck, but there aren't a lot of tuners, and there aren't any in-deck tuners, so you're not going to be doing a lot of synchro summoning. So yeah, I'd say it's probably kind of like a C tier until someone can kind of find a way to break it. But so far, I think it's just like 3 decent effects. Rage of Kairyu-Shin is another card. It's probably like high C tier. It's one of those cards that used to be good with Link format, but it's kind of died off. So basically, you can destroy monsters your opponent controls equal to the amount of level 5 or higher water monsters, and then your opponent can't use those monster zones. That effect isn't like, it's not that bad. It's a good effect, especially if you have multiple water monsters with high levels. The only issue is that was very important in Link format because you could lock out their extra monster zone and then they couldn't summon in that zone, so that was like really, really cool. But now that's kind of like a pointless effect. Like it just doesn't really help anything. It's most of the time you're popping 1, maybe 2 monsters, and that's pretty much it, which isn't bad. Most of the time you're popping essentially 1 monster, and it's kind of one of those cards where it's kind of like a win more card, because in this deck, if you have 3 monsters on board, you've already won. You don't have to do anything else because you have protection, you have everything. You have a negate, protection, a floodgate. Like you don't need anything else. So it's definitely kind of like a win more card. I wouldn't really recommend playing this, but it's a cool option. Fish Sonar. This is easily an S tier, one of the best cards in the archetype. Basically what it does is it searches out a monster that says Umi in its text, and then if you control Umi, the field spell, you can, if you control Umi or a card that counts as Umi, you can special summon a normal water monster from your deck, which is again pretty cool because there's no restriction on the normal water monster, so you can summon Phantasm Spiral Dragon, the biggest normal water monster. You could summon Terra King Salmon. You could summon any normal water monster in the game to your side of the field. And then on top of that, on top of being able to summon any normal water monster, this gets to search any Umi card, which again, I think is pretty cool. All right, any card that lists Umi in its text. Now the problem is, again, it can't search certain cards, so it can't search Legendary Fisherman number 3. It itself cannot be searched, so it can't be searched by, for example, Kairyu-Shin, because it doesn't say Kairyu-Shin in the text, or it doesn't say Kairyu-Shin or Umi or Sea Stealth in its text, so it can't be searched by Kairyu-Shin, which is kind of a problem. Also, the other issue is it can't search Warrior of Atlantis because this idiot says Legendary Ocean instead of Umi, so he can't be searched. Other than those drawbacks, it's almost a flawless card. It can search either a normal water monster, like I said, or a card that says Umi in its text, and then summon a normal water monster. So this card is actually good in both the Legendary Ocean deck, it's good in the Legendary Fisherman deck, and it's good in the Phantasm Spiral deck. It's good in all 3 decks. Really good. Next is Sea Stealth Attack, Sea Stealth 2. This is probably an A tier card. It's just a really good card. It's a continuous spell that counts as Umi in the graveyard and on the field. It makes all water monsters you control untargetable by your opponent's monster effects. Specifically your opponent's monster effects, though, not spawn trap cards. That would be really good, but unfortunately that's not the case. Also has another effect where at the start of the battle phase, you can special summon a water monster from your graveyard. This is during your battle phase or your opponent's battle phase. You get the special summon, and then that monster is destroyed during the end of that battle phase. But that's fine because you can simply banish that monster before you even reach the end phase with Sea Stealth attack. So you can kind of play around it. Very good card, very important for the grind game of the deck. It's super searchable with Kairu Shin. Awesome, awesome, awesome card. I love it. Next is Tornado Wall. Basically, this is if you have Umi on the field, you take no battle damage, but as far as I know, you could still take direct damage. You just can't take battle damage. But basically, yeah, if you have this on the field, you can't take battle damage. It's like a weird card you can play in maybe Phantasm Spirals, but generally speaking, I wouldn't recommend this card. Maybe D tier is probably better for this card. Next is Abyss Wave. This is a card that is pretty much unsearchable. But basically what it does is you can send Umi to the graveyard, and then you can send all Spell and Trap cards to the graveyard. I can't really even see... I honestly can't even see a reason for you to play this card, because this is a very Spell and Trap card heavy deck. So sending your own Spawn Trap cards to the graveyard, because it says everything, all Spawn Trap cards to the graveyard, and it doesn't destroy, it sends. So even with Sea Stealth's protection, you still have to send every Spawn Trap card on the field to the graveyard. I don't like that about this effect at all. But then again, like, it can beat every other Floodgate deck, which is like kind of cool, but you can't even search it anyway. It's like this is probably like a D tier. There's too many caveats there. Next is, I forget this card's name, but it's like Sea Stealth Jr. Basically what this card does, I'd say it's probably another D tier. It counts as Umi while on the field, so it's a trap card that counts as Umi, which is kind of nice. And it's continuous. And basically what it does is you can target I think it's like a fish, sea serpent, or aqua monster, and then you can banish it until the end phase. So it basically has one of Sea Stealth's attack, and it counts as Umi, but honestly I don't think this card is good enough to really play. It's one of those like mid 2010 cards that came out for Umi, and it just wasn't honestly all that great. Next is Sea Stealth. This card is probably an S tier. This card's another card that's really good. So basically on activation, you can activate a Sea Stealth. You can activate an Umi from your hand or from your graveyard. Super awesome, right? You can so even if your opponent destroys your Umi, you can just get it back with this card. Really cool. It has two effects afterwards. Effect number one is that you can banish a water monster you control, and then until the end of that turn, banish a water monster you control until the end phase, and until the end of that turn, Spawn Trap cards you control can't be destroyed by card effects. That is awesome, because again, this is a spell and trap card heavy deck, so protecting your back row is key. Yeah, that effect is really good. Secondly, it has another effect where it can also, and that effect can also help you dodge like Imperman and Forbidden Droplets and stuff like that. The second effect is if a water monster whose original level is 5 or higher battles an opponent's monster, that opponent's monster is automatically destroyed. So it makes it essentially so Kairu Shin and the Mega Fortress Whale and the token from the Phantasm Spiral and Legendary Fisherman and all the big monsters that you have here are essentially, they can't be destroyed by battle, because if your opponent tries to battle them, their monster's automatically going to get destroyed every single time. It's crazy protection, because a lot of people don't even realize it exists until the battle phase. So really, really strong card, and its recursion, like this is one of the best cards in the entire archetype. Next is Battle. So if you're playing Phantasm Spirals, this is a 3 of every single time. I'd say it's probably like an A tier. Basically, there's 3 trap cards in Phantasm Spirals. They're all different levels of good. I'd say this is there, this is there, this is D tier, and I'll go through them one by one. So basically, they all have the same effect, which is if you control Umi, you can activate them from the hand, and basically they all have different effects, but you can only activate their effects if all monsters you control are non-effect monsters, or I should say normal monsters. So basically, if you control all normal monsters, you can activate these cards, and if you have Umi, you can activate them from your hand. So Battle, basically, you can target a card your opponent controls, destroy it, not once per turn. You can activate 3 of these in one turn. Really, really good. It can pop up to 3 cards. Really good. You can target pop any card anytime, because if you have Umi and a normal monster, yeah, you can activate whenever you want. Phantom Spiral power. Basically, you can target a monster your opponent controls and negate it. Again, you can activate this from your hand, so it's kind of like a searchable imperm, and it reduces that monster by 1,000 attack. Again, very, very strong. But this is usually just a one-of, because although it is a searchable imperm, technically, you don't get to use it on turn 0. So if your opponent goes first, you don't get to use it, because obviously you don't have any effect monsters on the field. Yeah, you don't have any normal monsters and Umi on the field, so you technically can't use it. So most of the time, regular imperm will be better. And then the last one is Phantom Spiral Assault, which this card is just outrageous. It's a win condition, which basically, if you have three equipped spells onto a Phantom Spiral Dragon, which is the big dragon, if you have 3 equipped spells and a Phantom Spiral Dragon that has destroyed 3 of your opponent's monsters, you win the duel. Which doesn't sound that hard, but like, if you've already destroyed 3 of your opponent's monsters by battle, more than likely you've probably already won the duel. Like, to equip 3 different things and destroy 3 monsters is kind of outrageous. And then I've never even pulled this off, because I've never even tried this. And then they all have different graveyard effects too. So they have all different graveyard banishing effects. So Phantom Spiral Battle, you can banish in order to re-equip one of the equip cards onto another monster that you control. So if you have this on the field, you can banish from this graveyard and then put, from one Phantom Spiral Dragon to maybe the token, you can re-equip. This you can banish from your graveyard, and then you can equip from either your graveyard or from your hand an equip spell, also pretty good. And then the Phantom Spiral Assault, you can banish it from the graveyard to protect a non-effect monster that would be destroyed. All have different uses, but generally speaking, like I said, I generally avoid the equip spells, so those second effects don't usually come in handy, and this card is almost impossible to pull off. Next is Kairu Shin's Dark Reef. This is the last card in the entire thing. I'd say this is probably high B tier. This card, I have a love-hate relationship with this card. So I like this card because it summons 2 monsters, but I hate this card because it gets rid of your Umi for you. So basically what it does is you send Umi to the graveyard for cost, and then you can special summon 2 water monsters from the graveyard. It's 2 water monsters from the deck that say Umi in its text. And then after that, it also has an effect where if your opponent controlled a monster, you can also summon any number of non-water, any amount of normal water monsters from your deck. So that effect is pretty good, because you can put a bunch of water monsters on the field, and more importantly, you can put like Maiden of the Aqua plus Kairu Shin onto the field, which is usually a lockout of your opponent's. It's a lockout of your opponent's field. That is pretty good. Here's the drawback to this. If this card gets ashed, you almost always lose. Because if you activate this, they ash you, and you don't have a field spell, the deck cannot function without the field spell. So this is kind of like a callback to some of those older cards like Daedalus and Kodoris, and some of the other older cards that whenever you have to get rid of your field spell to get something cool. And the field spell is the heart and soul of the deck, which is kind of unfortunate. But again, I think the card would be a little bit too broken if it didn't have a major drawback, because it does get to special summon 2 Umi monsters from the deck, and obviously they're kind of crazy with Jellyfish and Kairu Shin and some of this other stuff. But that is the entire tier list. That is every single card, all rated from the Legendary Ocean, Umi, Legendary Fisherman, and Phantasm Spiral decks. If there's any videos that you would like to see, let me know in the comment section down below, and thank you for watching. La, 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 la.